For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome, if it's your first time. I am your host, Jay Black, and I have way too many project ideas. This is probably not news, but it is getting kind of out of hand. In an offhand comment I made at the beginning of 2026, I dubbed this year the Year of Thrillers, and I've sort of stuck with that. You could very much argue it's becoming the year of project ideas, though. And the reason I'm making an episode on this is because it gets quite complicated when you look at exactly what I want out of publishing, what I want out of the full house, and also just where all these ideas are coming from. The reason I think it's notable to do this in March, when I'm recording this at least, is that so far in 2026, I have had more project ideas than I had in the whole of 2025. So that felt notable once I realised that. I thought, okay, something is different here to last year. And it got me thinking, where are these project ideas coming from? Genuinely, how have these come about? And the answer for a lot of them is dreams. And this is actually not something I've had a ton of. Hypoxemia is the very notable one if you've been around the channel before. But this is something I always used to have as a composer, was being inspired by things I saw in dreams. But for a long time, I kind of stopped dreaming. And I sort of assumed that that was just how it was at that point, that okay, I guess I don't really dream anymore. But lately that hasn't been true, and yeah, I don't dream anywhere near as much as I used to, sure. But a lot more than I have done recently, and that's been inspiring for me as a writer this time. Not so much as a composer yet, but that's a very different type of dream. And I do think that's something that might be coming back, and that's something that I'm actually really happy about, because so that's been really cool. I do also think that I've changed as a person with how I view writing, doing more editing because, publishing and deadlines and things. And also just getting to enjoy editing, learning to edit properly as opposed to over-editing or trying to do things by too many rules that don't actually make sense and don't actually get you to good writing. Changing the way I think about things has at points changed the way I look at other forms of art, be that books, be that games, anything with a story, I look at a bit differently now. I do think there's been a change in ideation because of that, and sometimes ideas sort of start to come from that too. But I do also wonder if there's an element of healing in here. The beginning of 2025 was not good, to put it mildly. It was not a fun time. So, is it a coincidence that the beginning of this year has, had its tough moments, don't get me wrong, but it's been orders of magnitude better and I just so happen to be having more creative ideas. Are these two things connected? I mean, that's my theory. Can't prove it, but it's a theory. So, the question now is, how many projects is too many? I had this idea when I set up what I was going to be writing this year. And I believe I talked about this on an episode of the podcast, was I'm aiming to write 6 novelettes a year. And the idea with this was that, this is about how many novelette ideas I might have a year, maybe a bit more. So I should be able to get through all of these concepts in good time. It's also something that should just happen naturally alongside novel writing and editing. Because I do one day on, one day off, that 6 novelettes should ultimately just sort of happen. That's not me trying to stretch and say, oh, I want to write so much more, I'm going to do all... No, that's just how it sort of works out naturally. But I do think the first part of this assumption is just kind of wrong, actually. I think that when I first came to this conclusion of, oh, this is how many novelette ideas I'm going to have, I think I was in a dry spot of ideas, and I also think I wasn't used to concepting things at a novelette length. So as I've gotten more practice at that, I'm more sort of used to what that looks like. That assumption is just kind of failing. Oops. But I don't think that there's ever really a line where you have too many ideas. Not least because you never know when you're going to hit another dry spell. Like, that is genuinely a thing. I do wonder if part of the reason I had the dry spell is because so much media stood still. Because of how much media stood still for a while. The absolute and utter dominance of romantasy across books and film. Because I, didn't like the idea of romantasy to begin with. Romance isn't my favourite genre, fantasy isn't my favourite genre. Put those two things together, you're not really going to end up at something that I like. And given how dominant that was, and how that's kind of all that you see, it's profoundly uninspiring. If not actively just boring. It almost made me disengage a bit, I think. And I think now that romantasy is at last starting to drop off for good, and people are actually maybe starting to let it go a bit, and you're getting more talk about other stories and other kinds of stories, that's sort of starting to get my brain working a bit more again as well. I don't think there's ever a line where having too many projects is a bad thing. Having too many ideas is always useful for building a bank and for whatever you need. Do you want something do you just need a refresher, a short thing that's funny, or do you want to work on something really tragic, or work on this particular skill? Do you want to write something that's multi-POV? Then you'll always have something there. But it's also worth mentioning this cursed skin scenario. This cursed skin of mine was a project that I just had on the back burner. Much like this, it was just an idea in a database that I had sort of broadly there. And I thought, I'll write that when I get to it. I see a subcall that fits it really well. So I drop everything and I write that. So having a bank of ideas, not even necessarily a bank of written pieces, although that's always better to have, but even just a bank of ideas can get you a long way. Did this cursed skin work out? No, but next time it might. You never know. But I think something else that's been a bit different so far this year is that last year all the sorts of ideas I had were in broadly the same sort of spaces. It was broadly, to use Full House terms, broadly grit and quill suit. This time, however, I have had ideas that are goers for every suit besides quill. Well, maybe it's quill, the one is really not very clear, but it's already been a much broader base of some extremely vivid ideas, and I thought it might be fun to go through what some of those are. Because it's worth mentioning that the 6 novelettes I put on a hit list at the beginning of the year, I said I believe in that episode that it's possible that none of those even got written. It wasn't meant to be a hard and fast list. It was meant to be flexible. As of right now, these are the 6, but maybe if I find another idea to chase, I'll chase that idea. And so, oh boy, where do we start with these ideas? You know what, let's start with the thriller suit, because that's my unofficial first suit of the Full House. Like I say, like anything in the Full House is fixed and not just straight out of my brain at any given moment. So the working title for this one is Shadow Hearts. This is a novelette. This is a military thriller stroke espionage. We'll see where we get on that. I'm not entirely sure where that one sits. It's a bit Metal Gear Solid meets Phantom Doctrine. Probably you haven't heard of Phantom Doctrine. As far as I know, that's quite a niche indie game, but you get the idea. Both of those games are stealth games. They're both sort of quite political, both thrillery, both all of that sort of good stuff. If you like one, you'll like the other. This was another one. This was one that stemmed from an extraordinarily weird dream about clowns. Don't ask. Honestly, I don't know where it came from. I couldn't tell you if I tried. But this was immediately, as a concept, like contemporary, if not more than that. And I thought, oh no, I don't like contemporary, I don't do contemporary. And I don't know that I've ever said this on the podcast, but one of the reasons I really don't like doing contemporary is smartphones. Genuinely, that is one of, if not outright, the biggest reason is smartphones and how many problems and this and that can just be negated by smartphones. And how many problems smartphones cause, it's because you don't necessarily want to do the, oh, I don't have a signal thing, because there's a point at which that's lame. But there was no way that this concept would work outside of a technologically advanced setting. And suddenly I get this brainwave going, I've always liked the interaction between sort of ancient Egypt and ancient Egyptian imagery and cyberpunk. That's probably a really weird pull, but I really like how those two interact. So I just thought, you know what, let's go for it. Let's go for an Egyptian style cyberpunk. It's isolated setting, sort of extraordinarily loosely based on Shadow Moses Island, not least because I didn't play Shadow Moses. But you get this isolated setting, you get this sort of cyberpunk stroke dystopia type setting, so you have, the one guy who has a drone controller on his wrist, but he also has a khopesh because technology is kind of unreliable and things don't always work right, and sometimes you just need a sword and it's cool. I want swords because they're awesome, it's that simple. As for how I'm going to go about writing this Full House Tricks, I have no idea. Besides, this is going to be present tense because thriller espionage in present tense is just better. It works. It's really good. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why wouldn't you write thing in the most optimal style? As for whether it'll be first or third, not sure. As of right now, this is a vaguer concept than some of the other things because part of the reinvention process for this one, because it was so needlessly complicated and disconnected in dream logic, that did serve to make a lot of things a lot more vague. So whether first or third, single, dual, multi-POV is the best option is somewhat up in the air. I think that won't get decided until I'm writing the thing. Hardcore pantsing for the win. Okay, let's go into the unofficial second suit of the Full House. Let's talk about horror. This is Vagabond Cirque, which is a working title that really needs some work. This is a novelette you have heard me talk about on the podcast before, quite possibly. This was from the Dream Workshop episode, so I'm not going to go into tons of detail on this one. The idea for this one is it's sort of Oregon Trail kind of era, dark travelling circus story, child POV, it all is. Might be the darkest thing I've written once I've written it. One of those. This was another one that came from a very weird, very short dream, and probably changed the least out of any of the dream concepts that I've had. This one's going to be first present single in terms of full house tricks because that's absolutely going to be the most effective thing for this story. It's very much about what our POV character sees and what they know and what they don't. So having anything other than single POV and first person doesn't really make sense, necessarily. Present tense for this sort of horror story is an absolute must. Our third and final goer that's from a dream is Of Whips and Water, which you will also have heard me talk about in the Dream Workshop episode. This is another novelette. This is fantasy, so this is our first Joker. Again, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this since I covered it in the Dream Workshop episode, though that one probably got the most blocked by Editor Jade's spoiler blocker that I made specially for that episode because there were things that I actually just didn't want to give away because there's so much cool stuff in this concept. It's a very dreamlike feel in this one where it was originally sort of tonally very dissonant and I reinvented that to make it sort of surreal, dreamy, slightly psychological instead. And it's going to be brutal, this one, but very, very different to anything else. This is the sort of fantasy I can see myself publishing, potentially. This one is in first person present, because again, it just makes sense for this sort of story in much the same vein as Vagabond Cirque. And this one's going to be multi-POV, but a very different kind of multi-POV, not one I've done before. So now we get on to things that are, one of which is incredibly vague, and one of which is very specific, but I'm just not quite sure how that's going to look. Both of these have the potential to be novellas. Don't know. I'm an underwriter, and where a novella is in terms of word count is anybody's answer. Frankly, I have my own views on that, but I'm familiar with what a novelette looks like. I'm familiar with what a novel looks like. These don't look like either, but I'm hardcore pantser, you never know where things will end up. But in any case, the first doesn't really have a working title. This one I'm not convinced is a goer, but it's still lingering in my brain, so it probably is. This one, as it stands, is only really referred to as islands, because that's the place it's set in. It's set in this quite isolated archipelago. And it's effectively kind of a war story told from mostly bystander POVs. This one's multi POV for absolute sure. I think this one's 5 POVs. I think I did actually set that one. And it's very much a grim spiral. It's about things getting worse, people getting worse, people getting caught into bad behaviour spirals, people getting rewarded for bad behaviour and becoming worse because of it, people thinking that the only way to operate in their world, perhaps rightly, is to be a worse person, be a bad person, so that's who they choose to become. I do actually have some pretty solid ideas for this one, but you get into giving away story arcs, which is just not something I'm going to do. Genre-wise, I really don't know where this one sits. It's in a really weird space conceptually, where I truly just don't know. My instinct is to say a noir, but that doesn't feel like a great fit. It wouldn't surprise me if this does have a pretty tight genre label that would fit really well, and I just don't really know what it is. It's one of those where I don't think I'm really going to understand what it looks like until I start writing it in a pretty major way. I don't really know how I'm going to handle that tonally, because usually I'm sort of a bit up in the air on genre. That's not unusual for me at all. But with something like Shadow Hearts, for example, military thriller stroke espionage, tonally, I mean, those two are right next to each other, so tonally, that's not a difficult adjustment to make if one even needs to happen at all, depending. But potentially you end up in the space of something like Dead Penstemons, where going from romance to romantic thriller, that's a very different beast, and how that looks is really quite different. But it's also possible that this also almost comes across as different genres for different characters. It could be something that's really quite experimental. It is looking to be experimental anyway. I do want this in a mix of first and third person, at the very least, because of how different characters think and the story that happens around them. And their cultural conditioning, having that different for different characters, I think will be really effective in this story. Tense-wise, might mix that one up as well, we'll see. And last but certainly not least, I actually made a joke about this in another episode that might have gone up before this one, might go up afterwards. I don't know what the schedule is. I'm the one recording this, not the one scheduling it. That's an entirely different person as far as I'm concerned. I jest. This one also doesn't have a working title, actually. For the sake of, by the time I got done concepting this, I was too fried to think of one, and I haven't really gone back to it. This is another one that's potentially novella length, and it's a sports romance. Yeah, so there are two things I need to get out of the way extremely quickly here. The first is that it's sort of based around the Winter Olympics, and the second is, no, I haven't watched Heated Rivalry. No, that has nothing to do with this. Did that probably influence me coming to this concept at all? Undoubtedly, yes. But that's not sort of me trying to rewrite Heated Rivalry or really take anything from it. It's just this idea of there are some sports people. It's not really even that's similar to something like heated rivalry in the sense of everyone involved in the romance aspects is an athlete. That's one thing I know about it, about heated rivalry, is that it's, I think, a hockey player and a barista. See, I think that's what that is. But the idea, I've sort of gone conceptually with this one in a bit of a, I apologise if I say this name wrong, Luana Gintia direction, where you have the main couple and the side couple. We have the main couple the main story is about, and the will they won't they between those two, and the side couple who are also in a bit of a will they won't they, in this case enemies to lovers kind of idea. You know I'm not a sell on enemies to lovers if you've been around this channel before, but this one I guess is me going, oh, the Winter Olympics are kind of fun. It provides a lot of opportunities for me to play with different romance tropes, some of which I just really like, some of which I've not done before that I'm potentially interested in seeing what that looks like for my writing. It captured my imagination in the moment, and I ended up getting a pretty solid concept out of it. This is one that I have a lot of mixed feelings about, so it's entirely possible this is the last time you ever hear about this, but you never know. This one would be in first present multi, because dual POV romance is kind of awesome, and if you can have 2 and 2 on that one, why wouldn't you? You also get a different perspective on how each couple sort of looks at the other, because some people have existing relationships, some people don't, how they try and influence each other about, yeah, you two should end up together, or please, no, not you two, no, don't do that. That's quite interesting to play with. We'll see what happens with that. If you want to know if and when I'll be working any of those, the moment it starts to happen, Twitter is the place to go. That's where my writing space is. I do writing updates just about every morning, so you'll be able to see pretty much live what I'm working on. I also host the monthly Thrills prompts, so come on over and join the fun. I'm JadeBlack21 on there. If you like the vibe of the podcast and the channel in general, and you want to know what's coming up next and get advance notice of what the episode for the week is going to be, whether it'll be a podcast episode or a review, because at some point I have to decide what that is, Instagram is the place to go. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. You'll also get lots of indie book hype and other random stuff because I don't know what I'm doing on there. And if you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. I would love to be a part of your journey. My email is on the screen. Whether you're looking for an interview or an ARC review, both of those options are open to you, whether you want one or the other or both. A few things to note. Indie and self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from. And it's slightly different between interviews and ARCs. ARCs, I'm quite strict about what I will take. There is a full information video and it is timestamped on my channel. If you go to the Adventures Elsewhere Reviews playlist, it should be right at the beginning of that. As for podcast interviews, just get in touch. From now on, I will be prioritising indie dark lit because there are so few spaces for indie dark lit, and I'm trying to be the change I want to see. And for what it's worth, no, dark lit does not include dark fantasy. But that's about all from me for now. So until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like, or commenting, or subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. All music is done by me. Copyright Jade Black 2025.